إن الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا وسيئات أعمالنا من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله صلوات الله وسلامه وبركاته عليه أما بعد إن خير الكلام كلام الله وخير الهدى هدى محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم وشر الأمور محدثاتها وكل محدثة بدعة وكل بدعة ضلالة وكل ضلالة في النار. As we continue in this tremendous treatise by the great Imam Abu al-Abbas, Shaykh al-Islam Taymiyyah rahimahullah, the one who died 728 after the migration of our Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam, and the time now 7:44 p.m. Wednesday, July the 2nd, 2025, which agrees on the Islamic date, which is currently the new year, the 7th of Muharram, the new year in which we do not innovated practices. The 7th of Muharram, 7th Muharram, which is now Masa al-Arbi'a, Wednesday, Aam 1446, the year 1447, after the migration of our Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam. As we continue in explaining the lines by Shaykh al-Islam conveying the statements upon Ibn Khafif, we talked about, and just mention it quickly, it says, أن القصائد بدعة ومجراها على قسمين فالحسن من ذلك من ذكر آلاء الله ونعمائه وإظهار نعت الصالحين وصفة المتقين فذلك جائز. To the end of what he said, rahimahullah, I'm just going to mention it quickly in English so we can move to the next paragraph. He said, al-qasaid, poetry, and like we mentioned, poetry here, we already discussed the details of it. The poetry he's speaking about is a nasheed. Nasheed. The plural is a nasheed. A nasheed, you'll find that what the Muslims became preoccupied, in which it became something of an innovative practice amongst them. You'll find it now on a lot of the electronic platforms or the platforms on the internet, where a lot of them use what they call a nasheed, which is like a melodious type of chanting. It's like a melodious type of chanting. Not saying the poetry that is beneficial that we talked about. We're not speaking about that. The poetry of fiqh, aqidah, certain beneficial wisdoms, hikam, those type of affairs we're not speaking about. You'll find to the point where a lot of Muslims, they involve themselves in what they call a nasheed. It's like a form of chanting, a chant. Even if it's repeated or if it's repetitive, say Allahu Akbar, Allah, Allah, Allah. You'll find this a lot of those Islamic channels. You'll find that they now utilize this as a form of trying to now advertise their channels. They'll use these type of methods which are considered innovative practices. So like again, like we mentioned, we're not talking about the poetry that is beneficial for the different types of affairs that will help stabilize and allow one to become well-grounded in knowledge. We're not talking about those type of poetries, or the poetry that has hikam, wisdoms in it, that allows one to know what's halal, what's haram, and things of that nature. We're not speaking about that again. Like we said, Ibn Khafif is mentioning affairs called a nasheed. And a nasheed is like a form of chanting, even if it does not have instruments in the background, but the voices become like a form of chanting, like a form of a chant. So that's what he's speaking about again. So we'll read it quickly. He said, فَالْحَسَنُ مِنْ ذَلِكَ مِنْ ذِكْرِ آلَاءِ اللَّهِ وَنَعْمَائِهِ وَإِظْهَارِ نَعْتِ الصَّالِحِينَ وَصِفَةِ الْمُتَّقِينَ فَذَلِكَ جَائِزٌ. That's what he's speaking about, the permissible type that we already spoke about. To the end of what he mentioned, if you go to the last part of the line where we stop, you'll find that he said, rahimahullah, he said, إِلَّا لِمَنْ تَقَدَّمَ لَهُ الْعِلْمُ بِأَحْكَمِ التَّوْحِيدِ وَمَعْرِفَةِ أَسْمَائِهِ وَصِفَاتِهِ وَمَا يُضَافُ إِلَى اللَّهِ تَعَالَى مِنْ ذَلِكَ مما لا يليق به سبحانه مما هو منزه عنه فيكون فيكون استماعه كما قال الله تعالى الذين يستمعون القول فيتبعون أحسنه. To the end of the last part of the paragraph, I'll just read it quickly because we got to move on to the other affairs. He said, of course, mentioning the permissible poetry, because we talked about from the different types of poetry that has been utilized to now for one to be, or to one to specialize in the affairs of aqa'id, such as Nuniyah by the great Imam Al-Alama Ibn Al-Qayyim rahimahullah, which is a very beneficial book in aqa'id. You'll find that he utilized the affairs of utilizing it in the poetry form, from beginning to end, to help for one to be very educated, and not only educated, but specialize in the area or the affairs of belief and conviction, which is from those great books of Aqidah. So I'm not talking about that again. Let's keep going. So you'll find that he mentions in the next line, I'll mention it quickly because we have to talk about the new affairs today. He says, وَكُلُّ مَنْ جَاهِلَ ذَلِكَ وقصد استماعه على الله على غير تفصيله فهو كفر لا محالة. فكل من جمع القول وأصغى بالإضافة إلى الله فغير جائز إلا لمن عرف ما وصفت من ذكر الله تعالى ونعمائه وما هو موصوف به سبحانه ما ليس للمخلوق فيه نعت ولا وصف بل ترك ذلك أولى وأحوط. So this is what we mentioned last class. I'll go over it quickly again so we can now be all together, moving together as far as what we covered. He said all of that, well, all of what a person is ignorant of, meaning he was talking about the affairs of music. Keep in mind that Abu Abdullah ibn Khafif, who Shaykh al-Islam was conveying his statement upon, as you'll find that the practices of the Salaf, they knew that music was haram. You'll find that even though he was upon tasawwuf, and like we talked about the earlier stages of tasawwuf didn't become how it is today. The earlier part, even though all the affairs of tasawwuf and the earlier parts, like we said, was something that was considered, or what it evolved into eventually was something of innovation. But you'll find that in the earlier stages of those who have a form of a little bit tasawwuf were still upon the ways of Ahlul Sunnah. For example, Qadi Iyad, rahimahullah. Qadi Iyad, rahimahullah, had a bit of tasawwuf, but it wasn't to the point where it became grotesque, to it evolved into something that was totally evil and satanic, the way it is today. But as far as in regards to the earlier practices, from them was Abu Abdullah ibn Khafif, even though he had tasawwuf, and at the same time he was from Ahl Kalam. But you'll find that even in the earlier stages, they still believe that this form of chanting and musical tones, all of those affairs were unlawful. All of those matters were unlawful. Even the qasa'id, like we said, he was mentioning the affairs of poetry, but the poetry, like we talked about, he's talking about in this context here, is a nasheed, that form of chanting, the chanting type of voices that are utilized, that you'll find that a lot of the Muslims use in certain gatherings or celebrations or advertisement for their videos, especially today. You'll find a lot of their platforms, they utilize this form of chanting, which is something that was known as an innovative practice that the Muslims later adopted. And as a result of it, it became widespread and it became widely affected by it. So let's keep going. He's saying, Shaykh al-Islam continues to say, وَقَصَدَ اسْتِمَاعَهُ عَلَى اللَّهِ عَلَى غَيْرِ تَفْصِيلِهِ فَهُوَ كُفْرٌ لَا مَحَالَةً. We already talked about that. We talked about the affairs of the matters pertaining to music and the affairs that's pertaining to the word kufr, of what we said last class. We already talked about this because I had to keep going because we wanted to mention it. So he said that those who listen to these type of music or listen to these type of affairs, of course, if they intend it, the origin of it is that it's disobedience of Allah, sin. And we mentioned the affair, what they call kufr amali. Kufr amali. Kufr of the actions, where it means, it was a terminology used by the earlier Salaf. They used to find and say that sin was a type of kufr. But it's not kufr that removes you from the fold of Islam. It's kufr of the actions. And if you wanted to say, it means mere sin, meaning it renders your faith incomplete, or it renders your faith weak. It renders your faith incomplete, or it renders your what? Faith weak. So a person might say kufr amali. In general, you'll find that generally that the affair of sins, a person might say, but why did some of the Salaf used to call sin kufr? Kufr of the actions. Why? Why was it called kufr amali or kufr? Like we said, if you go back to the hadith, the Prophet ﷺ, certain sins, the Messenger of Allah ﷺ called it kufr. But it's not something that removed you from the fold of Islam. A person might say, what hadith? The hadith, which is al-Bukhari, the Prophet ﷺ said, insulting and cursing a Muslim is fusuq, sin. And fighting him, listen to what it says in the hadith, وَقِتَالُهُ كُفْرٌ. Fighting him is kufr. Or fighting him is kufr. When do we know that some form of fighting could lead you out the fold of Islam, or take you out the fold of Islam? No one. There's no dalil for that. Rather, it's a dalil that aids the people to Sunnah. The dalil for that is in Surah Al-Hujurat, that qital is sin. But the Prophet ﷺ in the hadith called it what? Kufr. So that's what you'll find, that Ahlul Sunnah commonly use that word. Kufr can mean what? It can mean kufr of the actions, meaning a major sin. It can mean sin, or a major sin rather. So a person might say, well, we should delay to say that qital, that kufr here means that you're still in the fold of Islam. The delil for that is in Surah Al-Hujurat. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in his book, now listen to this, وَإِن طَائِفَتَانِ مِنَ الْمُؤْمِنِينَ اقْتَتَلُوا فَأَصْلِحُوا بَيْنَهُمَا فَإِن بَغَتْ إِحْدَاهُمَا عَلَى الْأُخْرَى فَقَاتِلُوا الَّتِي تَبْغِي حَتَّى تَفِيءَ إِلَى أَمْرِ اللَّهِ فَإِن فَاءَتْ فَأَصْلِحُوا بَيْنَهُمَا بِالْعَدْلِ وَأَقْسِطُوا إِنَّ اللَّهَ يُحِبُّ الْمُقْسِطِينَ. Listen to the last part. إِنَّمَا الْمُؤْمِنُونَ إِخْوَةٌ فَأَصْلِحُوا بَيْنَ أَخَوَيْكُمْ وَاتَّقُوا اللَّهَ إِنَّ اللَّهَ تَوَّابٌ رَحِيمٌ. As Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in his book. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentioned in his book, he said, if two groups from the believers start fighting one another, rectify between them. If they were praying kufr that needs you out the fold of Islam, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, number one, called them what? Believers. Called them believers in the ayah. He said if they start fighting one another, but Allah still called them what? Called them believers. وَإِن طَائِفَتَانِ مِنَ الْمُؤْمِنِينَ اقْتَتَلُوا فَأَصْلِحُوا بَيْنَهُمَا. Rectify between them. If one transgresses against the other, fight the one that transgresses until they comply to the command of Allah. And rectify between them with justice. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala likes those who are just. Now listen to this, the last part. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, verily the believers are brothers. So Allah put emphasis from the beginning of the ayah that they're still in the fold of Islam, and He still put an emphasis on the last part of the ayah that said that they're what? Brothers in Islam. Even though what broke out between them was a what? Was a fight. You understand now? That's to clearly show that what the Prophet ﷺ said in the hadith, which is in Sahih, that fighting a Muslim, notice the message of Allah called it what? Kufr. The ayat in the Quran now gave you the proper meaning. Meaning, that's kufr of what? The actions, which means what? Sin, major sin. But it does not what? Remove you from the fold of Islam. So those are from the evidences and proofs that a word kufr could be utilized for certain acts of disobedience, but what's not intended is what? The kufr that what? Removes you from the fold of Islam. So that's to let you know there's two types. You have kufr of what? The actions, and you have the kufr of what? Of belief, which is severe, of course. That one will remove you from the fold of Islam. But that's the type of terminologies one needs to educate themselves in order to know that those type of wordings can be utilized for certain acts, and what's intended is not what one would think, where it removes you from the fold of Islam. Were you clearly hear in the ayah Surah Al-Hujurat that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had clearly stated that fighting had broke out between two of the believers, and he still called them what? He still called them believers. He still called them people that's in the fold of Islam, even though they fell into this disobedience. So this is what, getting back to the book again, as I said, everyone, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, excuse me, brother, let's go back to the book. Well, Abu Abdullah ibn Khafif, he said that this is disbelief. He said clearly. Let's keep going. But he's talking about the listening to music and the affairs of chanting and all those affairs of what's pertaining to the innovative practices. But like we said, what he's talking about here is what? Is sin. It's kufr duna kufr. The less kufr meaning kufr of the actions. Unless they make it halal, that's something different. That's something totally different. Let's keep going. فغير جائز إلا لمن عرف ما وصفت من ذكر الله ونعمائه وما هو موصوف به سبحانه ما ليس للمخلوق فيه نعت ولا وصف بل ترك ذلك أولى وأحوط والأصل في ذلك أنها بدعة والفتنة بها غير مأمونة. So he's talking about again the affairs of music, the chanting, the dancing. Keep in mind all the context of what we discussed last class. We're speaking about those who went astray in that aspect, especially the people of Tasawwuf who started utilizing these different types of methods to propagate their misguidance, to the point where they started becoming engrossed in practices of chanting, anashid, dancing, and how the shaitan gradually misled them until it became something that was totally what? Clearly satanic. But to the point you'll find in a lot of their gatherings, even in the masjid, they start to dance, chant, and have people clapping them, making beats, to the point where they started to now fall into something that was truly grotesque, something egregious. So let's keep going. So as he said, Ibn Khafif, he said the origin of this is that it's bid'ah, meaning of course the chanting, the anashid, the nasheed. He said the fitna of one being put to trial by it should not feel secure. He said to the point where he said, let's keep reading, واتخاذ المجالس على الاستماع والغنى والرقص بالرباعيات بدعة. He said taking gatherings upon listening and music, dancing, the poetry of chanting, clapping and chanting and drums and all those other affairs. He said those practices which were bid'ah, newly invented, innovative practices. He said you'll find that those who deemed this and believed that it was a munkar, it was an evil, it was a great Imam al-Shafi'i, rahimahullah, Muhammad ibn Idris al-Shafi'i al-Muttalibi, Imam al-Shafi'i, rahimahullah. He said also, Ibn Khafif mentioned the great A'imma, Imam Shafi'i, likewise Imam Malik, Ibn Anas al-Usbuhi, the great Imam. Also the great Imam of Iraq, Sufyan al-Thawri, Yazid ibn Harun, wa Ahmad ibn Hanbal, wa Ishaq ibn Rahawayh. These are great A'imma from the A'imma of Ahl Sunnah who all believe that these practices were what? Evil. The chanting, the anashid, all of those matters. And gatherings of what is of music, melodious tones, and people, you'll find men in gatherings. And like we said, you'll find that a lot of those who are practicing it were people of Tasawwuf and the Shia, especially today. And from those from amongst the Muslims who gather in those affairs, that go to clubs, then we know clearly that is sin. Clearly. So let's keep going. So in regards to what you'll find with iqtida'u bihim, he's talking about these great A'imma and scholars. So keep in mind that all of this context was Abu Abdullah ibn Khafif, rahimahullah, what Shaykh al-Islam was conveying his statement here. He's saying, taking them as a role model to be followed, all these great scholars who we mentioned, from Imam al-Shafi'i, Imam Malik, Sufyan al-Thawri, Yazid ibn Harun, the great Imam. We'll also speak about a little bit of his biography when we get some time. Ahmad ibn Hanbal, the great Imam Ishaq ibn Rahawayh. Ishaq ibn Rahaway, great A'imma. He said, taking them as a role model to be followed, it is most befitting than taken as a role model who's not known in the religion for those proper matters, the proper knowledge. He said, وَلَا لَهُمْ قَدَمُوا عِنْدَ الْمُخْلِصِينَ. Nor is it known that they had a proper footstep, meaning of those who are sincere in the religion, of those who are well grounded with proper knowledge. So let's keep going. Now this is where we stop and we're going to explain. So he continues to say, Rahimahullah, وَبَلَغَنِي أَنَّهُ قِيلَ لِبِشْرِ ibn al-Harith. We're talking about Bishr al-Hafi. We talked about this last class. This is where we stop. Verily, your companions, indeed, they newly invented something. It is called qasa'id. So keep in mind, Bishr ibn al-Harith, his name was Bishr al-Hafi, which is these names you should have some type of form of being familiar with. Bishr al-Hafi. Bishr al-Hafi from Ahl Sunnah. He was known for having zuhud, abstaining from the worldly affairs and being or indulging in opulence. He basically lived a simple life, rahimahullah. Zuhud, as you'll find that the people tasawwuf, and this is just a top point, took the word aestheticism. Aestheticism, I think, like you said, that's the art. I think that's asceticism. Aesthetic means like an art. Ascetic, not aesthetic. Aesthetic means like the arts or something like that. Ascetic is someone that abstains from worldly affairs but being in the opulent life. Zuhud, everyone, you'll find that zuhud doesn't necessarily mean that a person has to live in a manner where he has holes in his clothes or he's not clean. That doesn't mean that. You'll find that that's something of the people to soul if that's what they newly invented, to think that that's what shows fear of Allah and piety, which it doesn't. Unless that's the person's circumstance. That's something different. We're not talking about that. If a person is being tried in their financial situation, and that's their situation, that's not who we're speaking about. We're talking about someone that's able-bodied to have something that's clean, something in which they can present themselves well. But however, you'll find that even the Salaf that they said that this was a form of showing off. Isn't that a benefit? That a person, if you're trying to now gain respect of the people, even though that's not your circumstance, that's a form of showing off. Like you have the ability now to wear something clean, but you want to earn the respect of the people that's showing, say, see that person's a taqwa. See, look at his clothes. Look how he's trying to abstain from such affairs. Look how his clothes is holy, and he look like he's now someone pious. Look how even the shaitan can utilize poverty to what? For something satanic. Where you're trying to gain what? Prestige amongst the people for being a person of what? Piety. Even though that's not your circumstance. So keep in mind, the affair of zuhud doesn't necessarily mean that you have to be someone that has holes in their clothes or someone that is not washed or cleanly and things of that nature. No, that doesn't mean that. Zuhud can mean something that you just live a simple life. It's just simple. But a lot of people, when they hear the word zuhud, they think that it means what? That a person has to be in a manner that is unpresentable, where he has an odor, or that's something that the people tasawwuf came and they utilize it as a way to lead the people astray by. But that's not the meaning of it. But the meaning of a person, like we said, of zuhud could just mean a person that lives a what? They just live a simple life. Right, so let's keep going. So you'll find in regards to what Bishr al-Hafi said. So Bishr al-Hafi was from the people who was known for zuhud and things of that nature from Ahl Sunnah. Keep in mind, even though his name was Bishr ibn al-Harith, his name was Bishr al-Hafi. Bishr al-Hafi, you'll find that Imam Ahmad had praised, and we'll talk about also his biography, which I did years ago, but we'll talk about it again. But anyway, Bishr al-Hafi, it was said to him, your companions, meaning the people within your city, who have been affected by tasawwuf, and he's talking about people in his vicinity at the time. They newly invented something. And they called it qasa'id. They called it qasa'id. He's talking about the chanting. He's not talking about the poetry or the permissible poetry that we're speaking about, everyone. He's talking about the what? The chanting, the nasheed, the chanting, which you'll find that, like we said, a lot of the Muslims back then became affected by. And it's still utilized today by those who either are ignorant of the ruling, or how you'll find that the people or the evil so-called scholars affected a lot of people by their misleading fatwa, by now legalizing for the people these type of innovative satanic practices. So you'll find even back then, the affair of that nasheed was widespread, or started becoming widespread. He said, for verily, he said, yet your companions now have now innovated something. He said, like what? Now listen to this. وَقَالَ مِثْلُ ish. So the word ish is not something that's colloquial slang. So notice that the Salaf used to use the word ish, like ish hada. Like, what is this? They're saying like ma hada. Instead of saying ma hada, you can say ish hada. Ish is, you'll find that ish is fusha. It is. We'll talk about that in a minute. Like ish hada. Ish tadhaba ila ain. Ish tusawi. They say that. What are you doing? Ish. Ish hada. What is this? Ish is fusha. It is. Ish. But anyway, Bishr al-Hafi said, Mithlu ish. So this was how many years ago? It's about maybe 700 years ago. He says, Mithlu ish. Like what? So qala mithlu qawlih. He said similar to his statement. Then he gave the permissible type. So he said, for example, Isbiri ma nafsu hatta taskuni dar al-jalili. For example, that poetry is permissible. He said, be patient, and this is something that's given some hikam, some wisdom in this type of poetry. He said, be patient on myself until you'll find tranquility in the place of honor. He's talking about paradise, right? He said, that's good. So then he asks, he said, but where's the people that's listening to the type you're talking about? Which is the what? Chanting. The chanting type. قال قلت ببغداد. He said, I said in Baghdad, which is where? In Iraq. فقال كذبوا. He said, they lied. That's not something beneficial. والذي لا إله غيره لا يسكن بغداد من يسمع ذلك. He said, they lied. He said, which none has the right to be worshipped except him subhanahu wa ta'ala. Nobody will live in Baghdad that will hear those type of affairs. So basically he was denying it. Like, no, basically out of surprise. No, there couldn't be nobody in my city doing that. Listen to that type of nonsense. You understand? So that's what he's saying here. Like, no way. So you not find that Bishr ibn Hadith, the great Imam, Al-Hafi, rahimahullah, he gave the permissible type. Then he started to condemn the what? The chanting type. Based upon the knowledge that he had, reached him. But he was like in a form of, to a certain extent, self-denial, out of great surprise. No way. People started to actually busy themselves with being preoccupied with listening to that chanting nonsense? No way. No. So basically he's giving up what he knows as far as in his knowledge. But he's just surprised that no, that couldn't be where I'm at, that they're doing that. So keep in mind, he's talking about, again, what is he speaking about, everyone? A nasheed, that chanting, the nasheed. If after the lessons over, I'm sure that everyone, if you go to certain videos and put a nasheed, it will pop up and you'll be like, oh, clear. Understand, everyone? Let's keep going. So you'll find that Bishr al-Hafi. So number one, let's go back to the word ish. You'll find that the great Imam Muhammad Ahmad Jami, rahimahullah, he even said about this. He said, Kalimatu ish musta'maratun hatta inda al-awwalin. Laysat lugha عامية كنا نحسبها لغة عامية استعملها الإمام أحمد واستعملها هذا العالم الجليل قال مثل قوله. He said the word ish is used even with the people from the first generation, and it is not common language from the common folk. He said we used to think it was just colloquial, that was slang, lugha ammiya. He said, however, Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal used it, the word ish. It is also used by this great Imam here, Bishr al-Hafi, rahimahullah. So that's to let you know that it's what? It's something that's not colloquial. It's fusha. It's something that was used and it was considered something of proper language. Let's keep going. So then he goes on to say, rahimahullah, about his people. That nobody would be living in Baghdad who would listen to that type of chanting or that type of anashid. So he was just speaking about of what he knew as far as in his knowledge. But to the point, of course, there's nothing wrong with now negating something that you think, according to you, what you think is your best frame of mind, or comes to your, as they say, يَغْلِبَ عَلَى ظَنِّكَ, that is basically in the boundary of what you know. Especially out of something surprise. No. Like, for example, here in the Masjid, such and such happened, or something's going on. No, not my Masjid. You understand, everyone? That someone would say that. No way. Out of surprise. No way someone would do that. So that's basically how his reaction was. Bishr al-Hafi, rahimahullah. ولا يمنع أن يوجد أمثال هؤلاء ببغداد وفي غير بغداد. He said that doesn't, at the same time, even though he said this, it does not now stop to say that these people did actually exist in his land, Baghdad. Or other than what? Baghdad. He said, why? Because Sufiya became widespread in a lot of the different cities. The great Imam Muhammad Aman, rahimahullah. He said, Al-Sufiya, it became منتشرة في جميع الأقطار منذ أن ظهرت وأول ظهورها بالبصرة ثم انتقلت إلى بغداد ثم انتقلت من العراق إلى سوريا وإلى مصر وإلى المغرب ثم إلى الحجاز حتى انتشرت فهم أقل ما فيهم سماع هذه القصائد. He said you'll find that Sufiya became widespread in a lot of the lands, in a lot of the countries, in the Aqtar, since it what? Manifested or appeared. He said his first appearance started where? Basra, which is where? In Iraq. He said then it moved to Baghdad, which is also where? In Iraq. Then it moved from Iraq to where? To Syria. Then it moved from Syria to Egypt. Then it went to Morocco, or went to the west rather. Then it came back to Hijaz. Then it came back and came to other countries in India and Pakistan to the end of it. And that's when they formed their own group, their own sect called Jama'at al-Tabligh, which is also from a Sufi, and it became satanic and grotesque. It became something that was just totally what? Evil to the end of it. He said that type of affair, let's try to finish this. It became widespread. So the least that we could say, now keep in mind, they found this to be evil, the practice of whatever everyone, a najid. Right, everyone? The chanting. That chanting type of practice. So keep in mind, back then, they were finding this to be something what? Evil. The great Imam Muhammad Aman is saying that's the least of what was saying, of what they're saying that they were indulged in, or what comparison to what it became now. You understand? He said the least of what they said was just to merely listen to those type of what? Anashid. The statement of that anashid, those chantings, he said, well, however, they have now taken on and they commit acts that are way worse than that. هو أعظم من القول بهذه القصائد والاستماع إليها. He said they now have taken on something that is way far what? On a whole nother level, what is grotesque and evil that opposes the religion, than just mere of the affairs of what we're speaking about now, and just merely them listening to anashid or the other forms of music or those other matters. He said, for example, the belief that a lot of them believe in regards to their so-called mashayikh, that they have knowledge of what is in the minds of their people or their followers, which is called the murid, that they know what's in their minds. If they was to sit with them, in front of them, and to the point where one of them about to put their hands on their chest to hide, the so-called know that the Shaykh of Tariqah knows what's in his mind, meaning that type of fear and that awe. That type of fear and awe is only supposed to be for who, everyone? For Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. However, their so-called sheikh, they raise him to the level as if he's Allah, to the point where they have fear of what is in his mind that the sheikh might know. Those type of affairs, like we said, is what he's speaking about now. Isn't this type of matter and its belief, everyone, is stronger than just mere listening to a nasheed? Absolutely. That's on a level of what? Of polytheism and the aspect of rububiyyah of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Because someone having knowledge of the unseen, those are from the matters that's only for Allah. And that's matters you'll find in which a lot of these people have excelled as far as their evil satanic practices in certain Muslim countries, because of the Shaykh of Tariqah Sufiya who has led them astray. And you'll find that the Muslims have what? Progressed to this extent. So it's no surprising of why and how the Muslims became in the state that they're in all around the world, because of these evil type of what? Satanic practices. So that's what you'll find that he's mentioning here. How the affair escalated to the point where just merely back then, they thought that evil was just in listening to those matters of an-nasheed, of those so-called forms of chanting. But the matter, what would the Salaf have said now if they would have looked at it today? That was something that they had warned the Muslims not to indulge in. Why, everyone? Because you'll find that the Salaf, they knew how affairs would start. And if they didn't shut the door, they knew it would eventually and gradually evolve into something what? Worse, bigger. So that's the reason why they tried to cut affairs immediately, so it would not progress until it reaches that extent. So they try to shut the door immediately. That's the reason why people would see, well, why were they so hard, man? It was something nice. No, they knew that how human beings were. As soon as the door's open, then the door goes wider, it goes wider, it goes wider, and it becomes something what? Totally now out of control. So those are the matters you'll find, as we mentioned, in which that, such as the affair of Bishr al-Hafi, rahimahullah, that he knew that those type of affairs of a nasheed was something that had to be shut. And to the point, like you said, what the Salaf knew back then, you clearly seen it actualized now, where it becomes something that is totally grotesque, something evil and satanic, to the point where a lot of the Mashaykh al-Turuq, they have their followers called muridun or murideen, coming to them and asking them to now allow my wife to be pregnant, or some form of chaos or something, some form of adversity that is being tested in one's life, asking that sheikh to remove it from him, which is only for who? For Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So that's the matter you'll find, like we said, what we're trying to now establish, this point here, in this particular context. So that's worse than, like we said, قراءة القصائد والاستماع إليها bid'ah. Listening to those forms of chants, listening to it, number one, is an innovative practice. But however, to believe now that a person has knowledge of the unseen, to extend your hand and say to them, oh Shaykh, allow my wife to become pregnant, or oh so-and-so, remove the adversity that's befalled me in my life, oh so-and-so, allow my child to be cured from leprosy, or whatever he's facing, or some type of great ailment that he's being tested with, oh Shaykh, remove it from him. Those are affairs of the levels of how Sufiya, how it progressed until it reached this level. Something that even the Kuffar Quraysh didn't even practice. But to the point, like we mentioned, it said that not only was adopted by the people of Tasawwuf, but was also adopted by the people of Rafid, of Shi'iyya and Rafidiyya. They also practiced the ways of Shi'iyya, which is also in their i'tiqad, in their belief. You'll find that from their belief is that there's not an atom from the atom of the universe except that Al-Bayt, the family Ali, conducts in it. It's not an atom from the atom of the universe except that the family Ali ibn Abi Talib conducts in it. That's on a level of what? Rububiyyah of Allah. The Kuffar of Quraysh committed polytheism where? In the ibad of Allah. They didn't even have these type of beliefs. And despite of that, that would have been something that was enough for them to be in the hellfire forever with iyadhu billah. What about somebody that raises the bar? And the aspects of rububiyyah where they did never even believe that there's nothing of, you'll find, of affairs pertaining to the atoms of the universe that was being conducted in it is the family of Ali ibn Abi Talib or Al-Bayt, which is something that is tremendous. And that's the matters that, like we mentioned, every one of what we're speaking about in this particular instance here. So let's keep going. So we know that from our belief of the Muslims who traverse the correct path in these matters, that no one knows what's inside the minds of the people except who? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, as we know, in the ayat which comes in Surah An-Naml and other than that. As Allah Jalla Thana'u, He says, قُلْ لَا يَعْلَمُ مَنْ فِي السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضِ الْغَيْبَ إِلَّا اللَّهِ. No one knows of who is in the heavens and the earth of the unseen except Allah. Anyone that claims to have knowledge of the unseen, we know that that person is a taghut. That is from its meanings. As you'll find that Ibn al-Qayyim gives the ta'rif, or the definition of the word taghut. From it is those who claim to have knowledge of the unseen. From those who claim to have knowledge of the unseen is considered a taghut, as you'll find from the numerous meanings of them. So these type of a people who are tawaghit, from those who claim to have knowledge of the unseen, is binding upon the Muslim to distance himself from them. Or else it would affect their what? Their iman, where their affairs of faith will not be valid. Because from the validity of your faith relies on your disbelief in who? In the taghut, and all of its different types. Especially from the affairs of what we were speaking about, or the examples that we gave a moment ago. So let's keep going. As we know from the affairs of the messengers of the prophets in them, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reveals to them of what He wills to reveal to them, of the different affairs in the mughayyabat. But however, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in His book in the Quran, you'll find that He gives some form of revelation to make them, meaning the prophets and the messengers, have some form of the unseen which Allah revealed to them, not in order for them to now say that we have knowledge of the unseen, but however, in order to affirm that what they're upon is the truth, to affirm and confirm their prophethood and their messengership. But you'll find in the ayat, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala conveys to them to say to the people, I do not have knowledge of those affairs except from what Allah has revealed to me. So they have no knowledge of the unseen istiqlalan. They have no knowledge of the unseen independently. They have only knowledge based upon what Allah had what? Revealed to them. And you'll find in all the other ayat of the prophets and the messengers, especially our Prophet ﷺ, rejecting the fact that he has knowledge of the unseen independently. Rather, it's only based upon what Allah had what? Revealed to him. If that's the case about the final messenger and prophet to all humanity, then what about those so-called Mashaykh al-Turuq? Do you think you're better than Muhammad ﷺ? He even negated the fact that he does not have knowledge of the unseen, except what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has what? Revealed. How in the world do you think now you're better than him? And that's the particular ayat you'll find that we're mentioning here. He said, however, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, like we mentioned, reveals to his prophets certain affairs of the unseen matters that will take place in the future and what had taken place in the past. That affair being restricted, like we mentioned, in which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allowed them to be acquainted with. But it's not for them solely and independently where they claim to have knowledge of the unseen. So, in that particular instance we mentioned, I'll mention quickly what the great Imam that he says here, rahimallah, Muhammad Aman. He said, مشايخ الصوفية كبار مشايخهم معروفون عندهم بعلم الغيب والتصرف في هذا الكون والسعي في مصالح المريدين والخلفاء والدراويش من أتباعهم هؤلاء كلهم على حسابهم يعيشون على حسابهم وهم المسؤولون عنهم في الدنيا والآخرة. So this is the last part, and I'll mention because we got a couple of more lines we wanted to cover before we close out the lesson. He said this so-called Mashayikh al-Sufiya, especially the so-called Kibar, from amongst their major so-called Mashayikh. He said they're so-called known that they claim to have knowledge of the unseen, and not only that, they can conduct in this existence. They have knowledge of the unseen, and that they also what? Conduct in this existence. And that you'll find that they set out to rectify the affairs of what they call muridun, their so-called followers, and their so-called what? Khulafa, and their so-called darawish, of which is names from their so-called followers. And you'll find that they come to them based upon falling into the most satanic of affairs and the most hated of affairs to Allah, which is polytheism. And at the same time, they financially aid them in that type of evil, not realizing that they're being misled and that they're being what? Taken advantage of by these so-called evil scholars that have no type of affair of good for them, utilizing their so-called monetary assistance and living off of it, of what their followers donate to them, giving them money. Oh, such a sheikh so and so, make a call, or matter of fact, allow my wife to be pregnant, and financially donating these type of what they call da'm al-maddi, providing so-called financial assistance or so-called monies, and at the same time them being misled by the most evilest of affairs. And this takes place in certain countries and in lands, and to this day is still taking place. People in which you'll find that they claim to have knowledge of the unseen, they conduct in this existence of evil and good all the matters that are exclusively for Allah. They claim to have power in it, living off the money in which the people donate and taking advantage of them. And to the point you'll find that their so-called Mashaykh al-Turk says to them, I'm responsible for you in this world and the hereafter, until they believe that they'll be able to pass on the bridge over hell and that their so-called sheikh will carry them over it. Like we mentioned, everyone, that this is apostation. Kufr in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. إذن قراءة القصائد المبتدعة والاستماع إليها أخف ضررا من هذه العقائد الوثنية. And like we mentioned and said, everyone, again, that reading these so-called innovative chants and listening to it is lighter in its harm than this type of polytheistic beliefs and practices. So keep in mind, Abu Abdullah ibn Khafif, rahimahullah, in the past, you'll find that the Salaf had what? Deemed it to be evil what they were practicing of those matters pertaining to chants. How much more if they would have listened to what they become in these days and times? What they would have said. They probably, a lot of the Salaf would have lost their mind. You Muslims are doing this. This is what it has become. This is what you're involved in. And then you wonder why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's wrath has descended upon the whole world. Why you are involved in the most hideous and most satanic of affairs, and the sin that Allah will never forgive. And not only the sin Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala say He wouldn't forgive if one's to die upon it, raising the bar in it. That's to let you know how the practice and affairs of evil, which people have fell into, that how the shaitan will allow one to now raise the bar in it. It's something evil. Not just merely affairs in which was enough for one to be in hellfire forever, eternally, but to raise the bar to the point it becomes more evil, more uglified than that. So those are the matters, like we said, everyone, that we wanted to mention in regards to those lines. So keep in mind, what was considered evil with the Salaf was those practices of what they called again, everyone, a nasheed, those chants, in which you'll find that it's become utilized in a lot of different platforms, in videos, phones, and that's in matters in which you'll find in which the Muslims have indulged in. But like we said, those affairs, relatively speaking, is light in regards to what the beliefs they've adopted. So let's keep going. Let's keep going to the next one. قال أبو عبد الله ومما نقول وهو قول أئمتنا إن الفقير إذا احتاج وصبر ولم يتكفف إلى وقت يفتح الله له كان أعلى فمن عجز عن الصبر كان السؤال أولى به على قوله صلوات الله وسلامه عليه لأن يأخذ أحدكم حبله تنادى الحديث. ونقول إن ترك المكاسب غير جائز إلا بشرائط مرسومة من التعفف والاستغناء عما في أيدي الناس ومن جعل السؤال حرفة وهو الصحيح فهو مذموم في الحقيقة خارج. ونقول إن المستمع إلى الغنى والملاهي فإن ذلك كما قال عليه الصلاة والسلام الغناء ينبت النفاق في القلب كما سنعرج على شرحه فيما بعد أن هذا لم يصح مرفوعا عن النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم ولكن يصح موقوفا عن عبد الله بن مسعود رضي الله عنه كما سنشرح ذلك في حينه وإن لم يكفر فهو فسق لا محالة. So let's keep going, everyone. So the next, he continues to convey the statement upon Ibn Khafif, Muhammad ibn Khafif, Abu Abdullah. So Shaykh al-Islam Taymiyyah, again, everyone, he's continuing conveying the statement upon who again? Ibn Khafif. Let's keep going. This time now? He came in? Come first on it. That best. Allah Akbar, Allah Akbar. So let's keep going, everyone. Let's read a little bit, and then inshallah bi'idhnillah we'll stop. طيب قال أبو عبد الله ومما نقول وهو قول أئمتنا إن الفقير إذا احتاج وصبر ولم يتكفف إلى وقت يفتح الله له كان أعلى. To the end of it. You'll find that he mentions Ibn Khafif. He said, for what we say, he said, is the statement of our A'imma. So our A'imma, again, was who? All those ulama we mentioned 20 minutes ago in the previous paragraph. From them was Imam al-Shafi'i, Imam Malik. From them was Sufyan al-Thawri, Yazid ibn Harun. Also from them was Imam Ahmad, and other than them from the great A'imma. Also Muhammad ibn Bakhlad ibn Ishaq ibn Rahaway, the great Imam, rahimahumullah. Keep in mind that he said that they were the ones that we take as a role model to be whatever we want, follow. And the great Imam, Bishop ibn Hadith al-Hafi, the great Imam, also mentioned of what was permissible and how they were the ones that said that these matters were what? Evil. And all the matters you'll find that it progresses, that the smallest of innovative practices are to be what? Rebuked and checked and curbed immediately. Because kibar wahdharu kama qala Imam al-Barbahari rahimahullah, he said wahdharu sighar al-bid'ah fa innaha tasir al-kibara. As you'll find it, he said stay on guards against even the minor small innovative practices that the people what deem to be good. He said because eventually it will become what? It will become major. It will become major. So you'll find that Ibn Khafif rahimahullah, he's mentioned this. He said that this is the statement of our scholars. So like we said earlier, tasawwuf is not like how it progressed and became back in those times. So you'll find that they had respect for who, even though he was upon tasawwuf, rahimahullah here, that Shaykh al-Islam is mentioning. But he still had reverence for those what? Scholars and taking them as a role model to be followed. And this was from the matters they believed to be evil, was those practices of the chants. However, with those type of affairs he's now speaking about, because he kind of made what they call istitrad in the Arabic language. Istitrad means to jump to another topic, kind of. Like he'll speak about something, then he'll digress and talk about something else. So that's kind of like what he did here, and you'll find that the ulama that they mentioned about this particular paragraph. So let's keep going, just read it quickly because we have to stop soon. Then it says, in al-faqir, because a person might say he's talking about poor, now he's talking about that, and then okay, now you understand why he did that. He said he kind of went off topic a bit, and now he digressed, and then he's going to come back, speak about other matters. Let's keep going. He said al-faqir, if he is in need, and we have to explain this. So don't anyone listen online hear this and then they say, "Oh, that's what's correct." No, this has some details that have to be explained. But just reading generally the statement that Shaykh al-Islam conveyed upon Abu Abdullah Muhammad ibn Khafif, rahimahullah. Let's just read it quickly. He said, verily, the one poor, al-faqir, the one who's impoverished, if he's in need and he's patient and he did not beg, lam yatakaffaf. And we know that the word yatakaffaf means to extend your kaf, which is a form of what? Begging. He said, well, lam yatakaffaf, to a time, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will ease his affair. And said until the time or the point, where Allah ease his affair for him, then that's what a'la. He said that is the highest. So that's the most superior. Like I said, these statements we'll explain it if we have some time because it needs to be explained. Some details. He said, فَمَنْ عَجَزْ عَنِ الصَّبْرِ كَانَ السُّؤَالُ أَوْلَى بِهِ على قوله صلى الله عليه وسلم لأن يأخذ أحدكم حبله, to the end of it. He said, whoever does not have the ability to remain patient, then su'al, asking, is more befitting for him. Based upon the statement, or it's more befitting for him over the statement of the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that one of you that he takes a rope or gathering where he cuts down that wood to the end of the hadith. Like I said, when we now explain this next week, we'll talk about the details. Don't worry, I'm just reading it. He said, we say, abandoning the makasib, abandoning those acquisitions, not permissible. For example, and then he's given conditions, except by the laid down conditions of ta'affuf. Ta'affuf meaning like abstination here in this context, like not to do it, not to beg. And as we know, the origin in our religion, the correct position is that one should not what? Not beg. And like we said, we'll give the details in that matter when it comes. وَالْإِسْتِغْنَاء عَمَّا فِي أَيْدِ النَّاسِ, and the one to be self-sufficient of what is in the hands of the people. So that is the affairs. وَمَنْ جَعَلَ السُّؤَالِ حِرْفَةً وَهُوَ الصَّحِيحِ. Like I said, so keep in mind what he's saying here. Whoever makes it a profession and it is correct, and he makes it correct, then that is dispraiseworthy in reality outside. Don't worry, I'm going to explain it next class. Naqul, he said, we say. Now then he's going to jump the topic again, because I know everybody's going to say, he jumped out the topic again. He said, we say, verily inna al-mustami' il-ghina wal-malahi. Now a person to listen to music and musical instruments. For verily, the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, and like we said, this narration we'll talk about next class, that music, that it waters hypocrisy within the heart, just as water that it gives hydration to harvest or that agriculture. But we know that hadith, everyone, is not what? Authentic upon the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Rather, it's a statement for Abdullah ibn Mas'ud radiallahu anhu, which is correct from his statement, Abdullah ibn Mas'ud radiallahu anhu. That the isnad is affirmed upon who? Upon Abdullah ibn Mas'ud radiallahu anhu. As we'll talk about that in detail next class. وَإِن لَمْ يَكْفُرْ, even though he does not disbelieve, then we say it's fisk. It's sin, la mahala. That has to be. So that is the matter that we wanted to mention quickly before we stop, because we have to stop. But that was the statement we wanted to read before we mentioned the details next class. بإذن الله جل وعز. إن متعني الله إياكم بالصحة والعافية سنعرج على شرحه الأسبوع القادم بإذن الله جل وعز. We'll talk about the affair of the details of these statements next class, inshallah. So don't keep in mind, everybody who's listening online, that this is what's correct. We're just reading the statement, and then, like we said, we'll give the details later. Any questions about the lesson?
I have a question.
Sometimes
if I'm at work or if I'm on my bike, I'll do like a beatbox, passing the time. But I'm not trying to produce music. Would that fall under the banner of making music? You kind of like beatboxing where you're on your bike or at work. You're not singing, you're not humming or nothing.
if you can, just try to leave it off to the best of your ability. Leave it off, inshallah. Fadda. Now I'm left with the magic piece. Try to, even in myself now, the best thing to do now these days that we live, especially in the lands of the West, if you can, have your headphones and have the Quran playing in your ears, even in walking into certain places, to the best of your ability, so you won't be affected. Fadda. Especially these days and times. That's what I try to do. I try to keep my headphones in my ear and have the Quran playing wherever I go. So I have to listen to certain things that be influences before you're a Muslim. Fadda.
When they claim that they conducted this,
Absolutely. Yep. It's more than that. That's not the only thing. That's among the things that they could give life and death. basically, the people of Tasawwuf, they have so-called what they call Mashaykh al-Turuq, especially the extremists from amongst them in certain countries. You'll find that they made themselves basically like Allah. They have knowledge of the unseen, and that they can affect their followers from what they call murideen. And to the point you'll find that the followers that they enter upon them and they have fear like and awe like they have of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Like they'll come in trembling, like out of fear, and put their head down. How they would if they were in a prayer for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That type of fear is only supposed to be for who? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They make it for their so-called Shaykh al-Tariqah. What that, the clip that fell off? No. So based upon that, you'll find that they raise their so-called Mashaykh al-Turuq to the level of Allah in the aspect of lordship, which is something that is higher than the level of the people of Quraysh, the disbelievers during the time of the Messenger of Allah. They never believed that. The proof of that is you'll find that all throughout the Quran, you'll find ayat where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentioned in one ayah, or three ayat, affairs of rububiyyah. Who's the one that gives death? Say it's Allah. Who's the one that gives life? Who's the one that can bring out life from the dead? Who's the one that can give that? Those are all examples of rububiyyah. But why does Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in His Quran give all those examples of rububiyyah? Because Allah knew that their belief in that aspect was what? It was sound. So it could be utilized as a fact in order for them to what? Worship Allah alone. What about the person that in that aspect that Allah used a proof that they're deviated in that aspect? What could you do with them? So if Allah Himself utilizes the affair of lordship in order to establish upon the creation that He should be worshipped, knowing that the affairs of lordship or those different examples, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knew they were what? Intact at. What about people who had deviated in that affair? So what are you going to use as a proof to establish that Allah deserves to be worshipped? That's the reason why we say that the matters of rububiyyah are more grotesque and more satanic. Because the matters of what happened with the Kuffar of Quraysh, the mere fact that they took between them and Allah as mediators and intercessors that now allow them to be internally dwell in hell forever, that is in itself is enough. There's people from amongst the Muslims who misled them from amongst the Tasawwuf that raised the bar in that. That's to let you know how far the affairs have become evil. From those affairs is what he just said. To have the belief that a human being can give death and life, what is this? This is something extremely evil. And I said, that's not only that. It's more than that. They'll find that they come to the Shaykh al-Tariqah, having their head bound down. Shaykh, and they scared that so-called he will know what he's thinking. Until he even put his hand on his chest to cover, make sure that the Shaykh doesn't find out what he's thinking in his mind. If a person believes that person, no doubt of their type of what? That type of disbelief and that form of disbelief. Except that the person has been excused due to ignorance, that's something different. But generally we say that what? That's something that's a form of what? Shirk. Shirk, not only just regular shirk, shirk and raising the bar and shirk. You believe a human being has that much power? Someone created? Has that much power? That he can, and not only the people of Tasawwuf, also the people of Tasawwuf who's been affected by it was people of Rafidiyah. They also have Tasawwuf in them. They also have Tasawwuf. To the point where you'll find for the beliefs of the Rawafid is there's not an atom from the atoms of this existence except Al-Bayt conducts in it. As it says in a book called Al-Kafi. It's in there. There's not an atom in existence except that Al-Bayt conducts in it. And that when you hear the thunder, the Ra'ad, when you hear the thunder, that's Ali screaming. That's Ali shouting, they say. هذا صوت علي. إذا سمعت الرعد هذا صوت علي. If you hear the thunder, that's the voice of Ali. أخي إيش هذه الجاهليات؟ بل أشد من بعض الجاهليات التي اعتقدها كفار قريش. أشد. You'll find that the affairs pertaining to the Kuffar Quraysh, they didn't believe none of this nonsense. It's sad to say that the Muslims have adopted these type of what? Ideologies. And then everyone wonders why the whole world is falling apart. Because of this. These are the affairs Allah said in the Quran He will not forgive if one dies on it. And everybody believes it. And then they wonder why the whole world's falling apart. Is it clear? That's it. Stop. Yeah. We'll stop here, inshallah. وصلى الله وسلم وبارك على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه وسلم. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك وأتوب إليك.